I was still holding my coat in my arms when Marcus looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mom, you need to go. My wife only wants family here." For a moment, I thought he was joking, but then Vanessa tightened her grip on his arm and nodded toward the exit. That was the moment the floor dropped out beneath me, the moment something old and fragile inside me cracked. I stood there in the harsh fluorescent glow of the maternity hallway, frozen in place. My heart felt like it had been scooped out of my chest and dropped onto that scuffed linoleum floor. I could still hear my grandson crying somewhere down the corridor, a thin, newborn wail. Yet I was being treated like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong building. I clutched my coat tighter as if the soft wool could protect me from the sting blooming across my ribs. My breath turned shallow, my vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment, I wondered if Harold would have had the strength not to crumble if he had heard those words from our only child. Marcus stepped back, putting more distance between us, and the gesture was so instinctive, so practiced. It told me this decision had not been made in that moment. They had planned this. They had rehearsed this. They had been waiting for it. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice cracking like old wood, "I came as soon as I saw." He lifted a hand, cutting me off the same way a parent silences a disruptive child. "Mom, please, not now. We're tired. She doesn't want visitors." Visitors. I had brought him into the world. I had stayed awake through fevers, scraped knees, heartbreaks, nightmares. I had sacrificed the best working years of my life so he could have a chance at his. And now I was being told I was a visitor, someone who needed permission to step into my own family's joy. Every word he spoke felt like a small, deliberate shove toward the door. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe so I can share more stories with you. I tried to speak again, tried to explain that I only wanted to meet my grandson, but Vanessa's voice cut across mine, thin and polite and razor-edged. "It's nothing personal, Evelyn. I just need space. My family's already here." Already here. I glanced over her shoulder and saw them. Her parents, her sister, her brother-in-law, all gathered in a cluster near the window overlooking the parking lot. They stood in warm little pockets of laughter and hushed conversation, receiving updates, smiling at nurses, ready to welcome the new baby into their tribe. Meanwhile, I was being exiled, pushed out into the cold, disposed of like a loose thread that didn't match the fabric. A nurse passed by me, smiling kindly before disappearing into the next room. I tried to return the smile, but my lips wouldn't move. I felt suspended, as though the world had continued spinning while I remained stuck in the moment my son told me to get out. When I finally managed to speak, my voice barely survived the tremor. I just wanted to see him, my grandson. For a flicker of time, a single heartbeat, something in Marcus's expression wavered. Guilt, or maybe uncertainty. But Vanessa tightened her grip around his arm again, and guilt vanished from his face like breath on glass. "We need to focus on us right now," he said. "We'll call you when we're ready." A lie, because they had never called me during the pregnancy. I had watched it unfold through pictures online, a spectator in a life I once thought I belonged to. I had learned through Facebook when they announced the baby shower. I had learned through Instagram when they revealed the gender. I had learned through Vanessa's sister's stories when the nursery was finished. Every milestone was posted, shared, celebrated, with everyone but me. And yet the hope I carried, the foolish, aching, desperate hope, had still brought me here tonight. I had imagined being ushered into the room with soft smiles, imagined Marcus hugging me with that boyish grin he used to have, imagined Vanessa perhaps offering a tired but genuine thank you for coming. But instead, I was being treated like an intruder, not even an unwelcome relative. Something lower, something disposable. I swallowed hard and tried to straighten my posture, though my bones felt heavy, as though grief itself had settled into them. Snow was gathering on the empty windowsill beside me, blown in by winter winds that seemed to seep through the old building. The cold crept into my joints, stiffening me with each small betrayal. "Please leave," Marcus added, quieter this time. For us. For them. Never for me." I took a step backward, nearly stumbling, and turned toward the automatic doors. The metal frame rattled when the wind struck it, echoing faintly across the hall as if the building itself was sighing at my departure. Somewhere behind me, Vanessa said, "Thank you for understanding." I didn't understand, not at all, but I nodded because it was the only dignity I had left. The doors opened with their mechanical sigh, releasing a burst of icy air that hit my face with the sting of humiliation. Snowflakes clung to my eyelashes, melted, and streaked down my cheeks like tears that had no place else to go. My gloves trembled in my hands, my breath fogged in front of me, and the world outside the hospital felt so much larger and emptier than it had when I rushed in earlier that night. I stood still for a moment under the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. The cold seeped into my chest, filling the hollow space where hope had lived only an hour earlier. My grandson, my flesh, my history, my future, was just feet above me, but I had been cast out into the night like a stray. Across the parking lot, a couple walked arm in arm toward the entrance, smiling, laughing softly, their arms full of balloons and flowers. I watched them pass me, watched their joy, and wondered when mine had been taken from me. Was it tonight? Or had it been happening gradually, like erosion, slow and silent, until suddenly the ground was gone beneath my feet? My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, jolting me back to the present. I fumbled with the zipper, my fingers numb from cold and shock. When I pulled out the device, my screen lit up with notifications. A flood of congratulatory posts, pictures, tags, all from the Hammond family. Not a single message from Marcus. Not one. And then, as though the universe wanted to twist the knife just a bit deeper, another post appeared. Vanessa's mother showcasing baby Malik wrapped in a soft blue blanket, smiling proudly for the camera. The caption read, "3 generations together, couldn't be happier. 3 generations." Except I wasn't counted. The wind grew stronger, pushing snow sideways across the pavement, tugging at my coat. I pulled it tighter around my shoulders and began walking toward the bus stop, one slow step at a time. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if every betrayal weighed down my feet, sinking them into the slush-covered ground. As the cold bit into my cheeks, an old memory surfaced, uninvited and painfully clear. Harold's hands, warm and calloused, cupping my face gently the day Marcus left for college. "He'll always come back to you, Evie," he had said. "Boys wander, but they know where home is." If Harold could see this now, I wondered if he would still say that. I reached the bus stop and sat down on the metal bench, ignoring the sting of the freezing surface beneath me. Snow gathered in my lap as I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the empty road. Everything felt dim, muffled, as though grief had wrapped the world in cotton. For a long time, I sat there listening to the distant echo of hospital sirens and the soft crunch of snow beneath passing tires. I imagined the warmth of the maternity ward, imagined the soft beeping of machines, the muffled coos of newborns, the laughter of families gathered around their newest member. And I imagined Malik, my grandson, lying in a bassinet under those warm lights without ever knowing I'd come to welcome him into the world. That thought carved a new wound inside me. When the bus finally arrived, the doors opened with a low groan. I stepped inside, still numb, still hollow, still replaying Marcus's words. "My wife only wants family," as if I were nothing, as if I had never been anything, as if motherhood were a title they could revoke when convenient. I pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching the hospital shrink in the distance. The snow blurred its outline until it became nothing but a shape, a silhouette fading from view. I didn't know then that this night, this cruel, humiliating moment, would set off a chain of events that would change everything. I didn't know the hospital would call me weeks later, demanding payment for a bill I had never agreed to. I didn't know that Marcus's selfishness would reach a depth I had never imagined. I didn't know that one day I would reclaim my strength, my voice, and my dignity in ways that would shake all of us. But that night, I only knew one thing. I was alone, and the cold outside the hospital was kinder than the cold inside it. The morning after that humiliating night, I woke with the same sense of disorientation I used to feel during those first days after Harold died, like waking in a suddenly unfamiliar life, one where the furniture had been rearranged while I slept. I lay still beneath the faded quilt my mother stitched decades ago, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the radiator. It was an old, inconsistent thing, knocking and rattling its way through winter, And for a moment, I let myself imagine Harold grumbling about that stubborn valve the way he used to. But the thought dissolved quickly, leaving behind the familiar ache of absence. The shame from the hospital clung to me as heavily as the air in that bedroom. I replayed Marcus's words over and over, "My wife only wants family," until I felt physically ill. It was as though someone had handed me a photograph of myself, aged and faded and no longer recognizable, and insisted I memorize it. I had always believed that motherhood, no matter how strained, kept some fragile thread intact. But that thread had snapped cleanly, and the ends didn't even reach for each other anymore. I got out of bed slowly, my joints stiff from both the cold and the grief. The hardwood floor was icy beneath my feet, and I shuffled toward the kitchen, reaching instinctively for the soft cardigan I always kept draped over the chair. The house felt too quiet, too hollow. Every sound I made seemed to echo in rooms that used to be warm with family noise. I set water to heat on the stove because the kettle Harold bought me on our 33rd anniversary had stopped working years ago, and I never bothered replacing it. As the pot started to tremble and hiss, steam curling into the dim morning air, I leaned against the countertop. It struck me that this was the first morning my grandson existed in the world, and I wasn't welcome in his life. I tried to shake off the thought, but it clung to me. Every time I blinked, I saw Marcus turning away from me in that hospital hallway. Every time I inhaled, I smelled that sterile air, full of disinfectant and distance. Every time I swallowed, I tasted the metallic sting of humiliation. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of tea, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic as if it could steady me. The snow outside had turned to sleet, tapping at the window in a steady rhythm that might have been soothing on a different morning. I watched the world blur through it, gray and wet and uninviting. My yard, with its barren rose bushes and the old maple tree Harold planted with Marcus when he was 5, looked like a memory half erased by weather. A thought crossed my mind, quiet, gentle, then growing sharper. Maybe I should have known this was coming. Maybe it had begun long before the hospital incident. Maybe I had ignored the subtle warnings, the shifting tides. Maybe I had mistaken distance for adulthood, silence for independence, and neglect for busyness. And maybe, just maybe, I had allowed Marcus to drift away without fighting for the connection we used to have. The wedding came back to me like a film reel starting abruptly after decades of dust. I remembered being seated in the 3rd row, my heart sinking as I realized the Hammond family occupied the first 2 rows in full force. I remembered Vanessa's mother giving orders with military precision, directing who stood where and who walked when. I remembered how every detail had been chosen without a single question about my preferences or opinions. I had told myself it was Vanessa's day, that the bride naturally took center stage. But the truth, which I had buried under politeness and fear of confrontation, was that I had been pushed to the perimeter long before the vows were exchanged. And the pregnancy, oh, how the memories of that pregnancy cut like cold glass. I remembered finding out weeks late because Vanessa had posted a cryptic sonogram photo with a caption about new beginnings. I remembered seeing pictures of the baby shower I hadn't been invited to, the elaborate decorations, the smiling faces of all the Hammonds gathered around piles of pastel gifts. I remembered the gender reveal, where blue confetti exploded in their backyard, and it was Vanessa's sister who screamed loudest, while I had learned the news through a shared video on social media. Through all of it, I kept waiting for Marcus to reach out, to apologize, to invite me in, to acknowledge my existence, but he didn't. And I didn't want to fuel his defensiveness by questioning him, so I swallowed the hurt, again and again, until now. A strange numbness washed over me as I finished my tea. Not the numbness of shock. It was something quieter, more grounded, as if my mind had finally settled into a truth it had avoided for years. Marcus had not drifted away by accident. He had chosen distance, and Vanessa, with her sharp boundaries and curated family image, had done nothing to bridge the widening gap. If anything, she tightened it. I spent the afternoon moving slowly through the house, trying to keep busy, though my thoughts kept circling back to the hospital. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. I wiped countertops that were already clean. I reorganized a drawer full of kitchen towels, simply because the motion made me feel less helpless. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the grief kept climbing, inch by inch, until it pressed against my throat like hands trying to choke me. At one point, I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by old photo albums. I found a picture of Marcus at 12, grinning with braces, holding a fishing rod almost taller than himself. Harold's hand rested on his shoulder, his chest puffed out with pride. They had caught nothing that day. Marcus had tangled the line 3 times and lost a lure. But the picture captured something I couldn't bear to look at for long. The warmth that once defined our family. I touched the edge of the photograph, my eyes burning. That boy, my boy, felt galaxies away from the man who told me to leave last night. The rest of that day ticked by like slow dripping water, each moment heavy and long. I kept waiting for Marcus to call, even though I knew he wouldn't, and he didn't. The silence between us thickened until it felt like a wall. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from the hospital. The voice was polite, firm, professional. The caller explained that the insurance information provided by the family had been incomplete and that the remaining balance, $20,000, was outstanding. My name, they said, was listed as the financial guarantor. I stared at the wall for what felt like minutes after the message played, the phone still pressed to my ear long after the automated voice ended. I couldn't decide which emotion hit me first, betrayal, disbelief, or the kind of dry, quiet anger that feels like a match waiting to be struck. $20,000. Marcus had put my name down without asking, without informing me, without even warning me that his wife's delivery had complications or that the baby had spent time in the neonatal ICU. I hadn't known any of it. I had learned through a photograph that my grandson was born, and now I was learning through a debt collector's tone that I was expected to pay for his arrival. My hand shook as I replayed the voicemail. Each word felt like another door slamming in my face. My son had not come to me for comfort. He had come to me for money. And not even directly. He had let strangers deliver the message. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where I had processed the heartbreak of being kicked out of the hospital. The same faint steam from my morning tea curled in front of me, blurring the room like a hazy memory. I felt old. Not because of my age, but because of the weight of years spent pouring myself into a child who now treated me like a skeleton key, useful only when locked doors needed opening. The phone rang again. Same hospital number. But I didn't answer. Instead, I called back 2 hours later when my breath had steadied, and I told them something simple. Something I had never envisioned myself saying. Something that tasted bitter and liberating all at once. I have no family in New York, I said. The silence on the other end stretched long enough to make my heart race. Then the representative cleared her throat, confused. Ma'am, you were listed. I was listed incorrectly. My voice surprised me. It was calm, flat, almost cold. Whoever wrote my name did so without my consent. She hesitated again. So, you're saying you do not accept financial responsibility? I do not, I said, and I will not. It was the first time in my life I said no to Marcus, and I said it with a spine I didn't know I still possessed. After I hung up, I realized my hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from the adrenaline of reclaiming something I had lost years ago, my right to boundaries. Marcus called that evening. His voice came through the phone sharp as broken metal. What the hell did you tell the hospital? I closed my eyes, preparing for what I knew would be a storm. The truth. You told them you don't have family in New York? Are you out of your mind? Mom, they're harassing us now. They're saying the bill is unpaid and it's under your name. Why would you do something like that? The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh. He had put my name without my permission, but I was the one being accused. You did that, I said, feeling the anger rise like heat beneath my skin. Not me. You're being dramatic, he snapped. We were stressed. Everything happened fast. Vanessa was scared. The baby was in trouble. I just needed to put someone down. So you chose the person you didn't invite to the birth, I said, each word more steady than the last. He went silent. Then his tone shifted, growing harsher. I'm your son, and you're seriously refusing to help? I felt something inside me harden. You asked me to leave last night. You said your wife wanted family. You can't call me family only when it costs me $20,000. The breath on the other end was angry, frantic. "I can't believe you're doing this. After everything I've done for you." I lifted my head at that, stunned. "Everything you've done for me?" He stuttered, realizing the absurdity, then changed tactics. "Look, Vanessa's still recovering. Malik is... he needs so much. We're under pressure here, and now you've made it worse." "No," I said quietly. I stopped pretending. He hung up on me. The days that followed were thick with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a heavy, stagnant quiet that clung to my home like fog. I checked my phone out of habit, but there were no missed calls, no messages, nothing except automated hospital reminders I promptly deleted. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused to come. Instead, I felt like a lake frozen solid, still, numb, unmoving. But gradually, in the spaces where the pain settled, something new began to take shape. A life without expectations. A life without bending myself into shapes that no longer fit. A life where I no longer waited for the sun who kept choosing everyone but me. I started walking again, bundled tightly against the cold. I joined the neighborhood book club, even though I had always convinced myself I was too busy. I let myself laugh with women my age who understood grief and adult children and the slow, quiet reconstruction of a life that feels smaller than before. I knitted again, something I had abandoned for years. The soft click of needles became a kind of therapy, the simple rhythm soothing my frayed spirit. I made scarves for neighbors, hats for the winter shelter downtown, baby blankets for strangers, children I would never meet. And for a while it was enough. Not happiness, not yet, but peace in small doses, until the storm came knocking a year and a half later. It began with a phone call from a social worker, a voice trembling with urgency, a situation unfolding like a quiet tragedy, a home where chaos had replaced stability. A child, my grandson, caught in the crossfire of stress, job loss, postpartum struggles, and emotional breakdowns. A question whispered into my ear like a plea. "You are the only family member capable of caring for him. Will you come?" And in that moment, despite everything, I felt something rise inside me. Not guilt, not duty, not obligation. Love, not for Marcus, not for Vanessa, but for Malik, the boy who had no say in the brokenness around him. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and said yes. And that yes would change everything. When the social worker's voice faded from the phone that afternoon, the house felt suddenly too still, as though even the air had paused to listen to the shift happening inside me. I stood in the middle of my living room with the phone still in my hand, my breath caught somewhere between fear and something I hadn't felt in years, purpose. Malik, my grandson. A child I had never been allowed to hold, whose life I had watched through photographs like a stranger peering through a window. And now they were asking me to step into the very role I had once been denied. I placed the phone on the coffee table and lowered myself into my old armchair. The cushion dipped with the familiar creak of old springs beneath me, but even that comforting sound couldn't steady the racing of my heart. A year and a half had passed since the hospital call, since Marcus's last eruption, since I had said the unforgivable truth that I would no longer be his well of endless sacrifice. In that time, I had carved out a life for myself, a quiet, solitary life, but one built with intention rather than desperation. And now, life was asking me to reopen a wound I had only just learned how to tend. The social worker's words echoed through my memory with a steady insistence. "It's unstable in the home. Vanessa is struggling more than she'll admit. Marcus has been unemployed for several months. Your grandson is safe, but he needs consistent care." Consistent care. Stability. A presence that lasted. It was strange how those words seemed to reach for me. For years, I had been treated like a burden or an afterthought. But now, in the collapse of their curated world, they remembered me, not as a wallet, not as a background accessory, not as an inconvenient reminder of who Marcus had been before Vanessa reshaped him. They remembered me because I could give something they could not: steadiness. I closed my eyes and let out a long, trembling breath. My mind drifted back to the moment at the hospital when I had been told to leave. I remembered the cold bite of the wind, the ache in my chest, the shame pressing down on me. For so long, I had replayed that night as the moment I lost my family. But now, standing at the threshold of a new decision, I wondered if that night had been preparing me for this one, stripping away the illusions, forcing me to see Marcus and Vanessa for who they were, and forcing me to see myself for what I had become: smaller, quieter, too accustomed to standing in shadows. Malik deserved better than shadows. He deserved someone willing to stand in the light for him. I stood up slowly, bones creaking, spirit trembling, and reached for the side table drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of knitting needles and a folded list of grocery prices, was a small envelope of photos I had ordered secretly last year. Screenshots I had printed out, from the hospital announcement, from Vanessa's social media posts, from the few times Malik's curious little face appeared in the background of their curated family life. I spread them out on the table. There he was, the tiny newborn, swaddled in blue, the chubby 6-month-old sitting on Vanessa's sister's lap, the toddler clinging to Vanessa's leg while she sat at some upscale cafe. His eyes were big, dark, bright. He had Harold's eyes. And his hair, soft little curls that reminded me of Marcus when he was young. To love a child you had never met was a strange kind of love, quiet but fierce, like a seed growing roots in the dark. I touched one of the photos with the tip of my finger. "I'm coming for you," I whispered, not as a promise but as a declaration to myself. By evening, I had packed a bag. Not much, a few clothes, my knitting, some books, a small framed photo of Harold that had sat beside my bed for years. I did not know how long I would be gone. I only knew that I couldn't abandon that child to the chaos the social worker had described. On the train ride into the city, my thoughts traced the long, painful road that had brought me to this moment. Marcus had always been the type to chase shiny things. Ambition, status, external validation, he craved them with a hunger that had only grown with age. Vanessa had fed that hunger, not because she shared it, but because she believed image was everything. Her family lived by a creed of appearances: picture-perfect holidays, tightly curated social media feeds, spotless reputations polished like silver. They had adopted Marcus easily, placing him on display as though he was one more accessory that completed the aesthetic of their family. And I, quiet, humble, widowed, not wealthy, not glamorous, had not fit their image. I had been tolerated at best, erased at worst. As the train rocked gently beneath me, I let myself remember the years before all this, when Marcus still called me Mom, with warmth instead of impatience. When he came home with scraped knees, embarrassed but proud. When he ran to Harold's barbershop after school, sweeping hair clippings from the floor just so he could talk to the old-timers who came for Harold's advice as much as his haircuts. Those memories were a soft ache, but an ache nonetheless. When we lost Harold, everything changed. Marcus had taken the barbershop from sentiment to profit in a matter of weeks. Selling it felt like the first betrayal, but I buried my grief, telling myself he needed to move on, that the world was different now, that maybe he would find his own path. But the truth was more painful. Harold's world didn't fit the image Marcus wanted to build with Vanessa. A small, humble barbershop had no place in the Hammond aesthetic. The train screeched into the city station at dusk. The sky was streaked with purples and bruised pinks, the kind of cold winter sunset that made the city feel more solemn. I stepped off, the weight of my bag dragging at my shoulder, and inhaled the metallic scent of the city. Cars honked in the distance, people rushed around me, and I watched as families bundled in coats walked hand in hand, their laughter drifting through the icy air. At the curb, a rideshare car waited for me, arranged by the social worker. The driver was a middle-aged woman with a soft, worn voice and patient eyes. She seemed to sense my nerves without me saying a word. "You visiting family?" she asked as she pulled into traffic. I stared out the window for a moment before answering. "Something like that." She nodded, not pushing further, and the rest of the ride unfolded in comfortable silence. When we arrived at the address the social worker had given me, I felt my stomach drop. Marcus and Vanessa's apartment building towered above the street like some sleek glass monolith. It was modern, expensive, the kind of place with a doorman who probably judged you based on the brand of your coat. I stepped into the lobby, clutching my bag as though it were armor. The marble floors gleamed so brightly they reflected the ceiling lights like water. The social worker met me there, a woman named Danielle with thin spectacles and a clipboard pressed against her chest. She smiled warmly when she saw me. "Mrs. Carter-Wilson, thank you for coming on such short notice." "It was not a question," I replied softly. "He's my grandson." The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt unbearably long. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, each beat sending tremors down my arms. I had imagined this moment countless times, meeting Malik, but I had imagined joy, not sorrow. I had imagined being welcomed into his life, not stepping into it amid crisis. When the elevator doors slid open, Danielle led me down a quiet hallway. The carpet muffled our footsteps, making the whole place feel eerily silent. She stopped at a door near the end and turned to me. "Before we go in," she said gently, "I want you to prepare yourself. The apartment is disorganized. They've been under significant stress. Malik is safe, but he's been spending most of his time in a playpen or in front of the television because Vanessa's been unable to engage much, and Marcus isn't coping well." A knot formed in my stomach. Is he hurt? No, just neglected emotionally, and he's very withdrawn around strangers. Strangers. I swallowed thickly. That word stung more than I cared to admit. Danielle knocked gently. The door opened a moment later, and Marcus appeared in the doorway. He looked nothing like the polished, ambitious son I remembered. His hair was untrimmed and uneven, dark circles spread like bruises beneath his eyes, and his clothes hung on him with the careless slouch of someone who had stopped trying. The anger I expected to see wasn't there. Instead, he looked deflated, smaller, as though the arrogance he once wore like armor had melted in the heat of real life. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. I waited for the resentment, for the blame, for the tension that always curled through his words when he spoke to me. But none of that came. He just stepped back, allowing me inside, and what I saw broke something inside me. The apartment, once so pristine, looked like a tornado had moved through it. Dishes piled high in the sink, clothes draped over furniture, toys scattered across the floor. The air smelled faintly of spoiled milk and exhaustion. And in the middle of the living room sat a small playpen, and inside it, staring up at me with big lost eyes, was Malik. My breath caught. He was beautiful. Delicate curls framed his round face, and his little hands clutched a stuffed elephant worn from too much handling. His expression was cautious at first, as though he had trained himself to expect disappointment. Then his eyes flicked toward Marcus, then back to me, curiosity softening his gaze. I took a step closer, not too fast, not too eager, giving him space to read me. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm your grandma." He blinked slowly, studying me as though trying to place me among the chaos of his small world. Then, to my astonishment, he reached slightly toward me. It wasn't a full gesture, not a leap, not a plea, just a tiny, uncertain lift of his hand, like the beginning of trust. My knees nearly gave out. I knelt beside the playpen, tears rising despite my attempt to contain them, and extended my hand carefully. He touched my fingers, and that single touch, warm, soft, delicate, felt like the mending of 1,000 broken threads inside me. Marcus hovered nearby, rubbing his forehead with one hand. "Mom, I don't know what to say. We're overwhelmed. She's not herself. I lost my job months ago. Everything's falling apart." I wanted to be angry. I should have been angry. He had pushed me away for years, used me when convenient, forgotten me until it benefited him. But when I looked at him, my son, tired and drowning, I saw a boy still inside him, the one who used to run into my arms after school. "You can say," I murmured, my hand still resting near Malik's, "that you need help." His face crumpled, not in shame, but in relief. Pure, exhausted relief. For the first time in a very long while, Marcus nodded. "I need help." And though it wasn't an apology, not yet, it was the first step toward rebuilding something that had been broken for far too long. I lifted Malik into my arms. He fit against me as though the world had been waiting for this moment. He didn't cry. He didn't resist. He rested his little head against my shoulder and sighed a small, tired sigh. And just like that, I knew. This was where the healing began. Not with Marcus, not with Vanessa, with Malik, the child who would teach all of us how to start again. I woke before dawn on my first morning with Malik, not because of noise. He was still asleep in the small cot Marcus had hastily set up beside the couch, but because of the sheer weight of the moment pressing against my chest. It felt as though a heavy curtain had lifted in the night, revealing a landscape I had been avoiding for years. A landscape of responsibility, yes, but also of possibility. The apartment was still dim, the faintest blue light creeping in from the city outside. I sat up slowly, careful not to creak the floorboards. My joints protested, stiff and weary, but there was a pulse of renewed strength in them, something I had not felt in years. There is a peculiar kind of energy that rises in a woman when she becomes needed again, not used, not exploited, but truly needed. It does not erase exhaustion, but it reorders it. Malik slept curled on his side, one small hand clutching the stuffed elephant. His breathing was soft and regular, his curls slightly damp at the edges of his forehead. Watching him in that quiet gave me a feeling I had not known since Harold was alive, the sense that my presence had purpose. I rose and walked to the kitchen, taking in again the disarray that had become their living reality. The sink was still full, the counters cluttered, the trash can overflowing. But now that the first shock had passed, I saw something different in the mess. It wasn't carelessness, it wasn't laziness, it was collapse. A slow, creeping collapse of two people who had overestimated their strength and underestimated their vulnerabilities. The kettle hissed on the stove as I warmed water for tea, and as I waited, I leaned on the counter and asked myself the question I had avoided since the social worker had called. What now? What role was I stepping into? Temporary caretaker? Emotional crutch? Backbone of an unraveling household? Or something else entirely? The answer came to me gradually, like dawn seeping into the room. I wasn't stepping into their crisis. I was stepping into his life. Malik's life. I made a quiet cup of tea and sipped it in the dim silence, letting its warmth travel slowly through me. The exhaustion I carried from years of grief felt lighter now, as though part of it had been absorbed into the dark city sky outside. The pain of the past, the hospital, the rejection, the bill, the year of silence, still existed, but it felt different now. Less like a wound and more like a map that had led me to this moment. When Malik eventually stirred, it was with a soft whimper, the kind that told me he was waking rather than crying. I approached him gently, whispering his name the way one might whisper a prayer. He blinked up at me, confusion mixing with recognition. I offered my hands, and after a small pause, he lifted his arms toward me. A simple gesture, but one that cracked open something deep in my chest. I lifted him carefully, feeling the weight of him settle against my shoulder. Not heavy, just real. Marcus finally emerged from the bedroom, looking years older than he was. He stood in the doorway like a man who had forgotten how to inhabit his own home. He watched me with Malik for several seconds, his expression caught somewhere between awe and regret. "You're good with him," he said quietly. "I've had practice," I replied, my voice gentle but steady. His eyes lowered. "I know." There it was, that flicker of acknowledgement. Not enough to erase anything, but enough to mark the beginning of something new, or perhaps the rebuilding of something old. Vanessa appeared next. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her movements slow, as though she were walking through deep water. She looked at Malik with a longing that startled me, a longing twisted with guilt. I saw immediately that she loved him, that she had always loved him, but she had been swallowed by something stronger than love. Fear. Fear of failing, fear of judgment, fear of losing control. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice fragile. I nodded, because words would have shattered her. The day that followed was quiet but heavy. I made breakfast, oatmeal, simple and warm, and coaxed both of them to eat. Malik sat in his high chair watching me with wide, curious eyes. Each time I passed him, he lifted his little hand as if to make sure I didn't disappear. Vanessa vanished into the bedroom several times, returning with shoulders slumped, struggling to hold herself together. Marcus sat at the table with his head in his hands more than once, muttering questions he couldn't answer. "What am I doing? How did it get this bad? Why can't I fix it?" I didn't judge them. Perhaps the younger version of me, naive, hopeful, eager to please, might have judged. But the woman I'd become, shaped by grief, sharpened by betrayal, steadied by survival, saw their collapse for what it was, the unraveling of a facade they had spent years maintaining. By midday, the social worker returned for a home assessment. She watched quietly as I fed Malik, as Marcus spoke honestly about the pressure he'd been under, as Vanessa admitted her postpartum depression had spiraled far beyond her control. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't dignified, but it was real. After the assessment, Danielle pulled me aside near the window. "They need you," she said simply. "I know," I replied, "but I want to be clear," she added gently. "You're not obligated to move here. You can request temporary custody if things worsen, or supervision, or shared care. You have choices. I looked at Malik playing on the floor, rolling a plastic truck with intense focus. And then at Marcus, speaking softly to Vanessa for the first time all day. And I realized something that made my breath hitch. I wasn't here to rescue Marcus or Vanessa. I was here to rescue myself too. To reclaim the part of me they had discarded. I nodded slowly. I'll stay, for now. That night, when the apartment finally fell quiet, I rocked Malik in the dim light of the living room. His small fingers curled around one strand of my sweater, holding on with surprising strength. I held him tighter. In that moment, a clarity washed over me so complete, so profound that I almost whispered it aloud. This is what love is supposed to feel like. Not transactional, not convenient, not dependent on usefulness, but pure, steady, anchored. Time passed in days, then weeks. Vanessa began attending therapy, slowly climbing out of her darkness. Marcus found a part-time job, then another. I helped with Malik's routines, teaching them the patterns that had once shaped my own motherhood. Warm baths at dusk, gentle songs before bed, the art of speaking softly even in frustration. We did not fix everything, but we learned how to stop pretending. One evening near spring, Marcus sat across from me on the balcony, feet tucked beneath him like he used to sit as a teenager. "Mom," he said softly, "I owe you an apology." I didn't speak. I let the silence invite honesty. He swallowed hard. When Vanessa got pregnant, I wanted everything to be perfect. Her family cared about appearances, and I wanted to fit into their world. I wanted to prove we were, put together, better than I felt inside. And pushing you away felt easier than explaining anything. Easier. The word slid into my chest like a dull blade. "I'm not excusing it," he added quickly. "I was wrong. I was cruel. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry." The apology didn't erase the past, but it soothed a wound that had been open for far too long. I took his hand. His fingers trembled. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. Not for him, but for myself. Vanessa apologized too later that week, her voice quiet, her eyes wet, her pride finally stripped away. "We wanted to control everything," she said, "but we lost ourselves instead. And we lost you. I'm ashamed of how we treated you. I didn't offer easy absolution. I simply said, you're rebuilding now. That matters." And we did rebuild. Carefully, slowly, honestly. Malik grew into a vibrant toddler, full of laughter that filled the apartment like sunlight. He called me Gamma, the first version of Grandma his little tongue could manage, and every time he said it, something inside me unfroze. In time, I returned home, not because I was no longer needed, but because I had rebuilt something strong enough to support itself. Marcus visited often, Vanessa too, and Malik, sweet Malik, ran into my arms each time with the full force of a child who knew he was loved. And with that, the circle closed. Not neatly, not perfectly, but truthfully. I found something I hadn't known I was searching for. Not the old version of family, but a renewed one. A family built not on appearances or obligation, but on respect, boundaries, and love that didn't diminish me. And I found myself again, steadier, wiser, and no longer willing to accept emotional crumbs. If you have ever walked through betrayal and chosen to rise anyway, then you know. Strength grows quietly, like roots. And freedom comes the moment you choose yourself without apology. What would you have done in my place? Tell me where you're listening from. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you wish to support more stories, you can always use Super Thanks. With heartfelt greetings, until next time.